Most unlikely of villains, smooths of brain and for pause. Does it talk? Does it know how? Does it bottle? Does it meow? In the lair of the cerebral bore, and will show him so much more. We'll leave your brains at the
Welcome back to Cerebrivore. My name is Jason. I'm the host of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. Again, we're in the dog days of summer, so this is part 2 of our 4-part time travel series. Now, part 1 came out last week, and you can find that the same place you found this. These are republished shows. They were originally published over on the Safer Fantasy Crafting podcast. Now, next week we're going to do part 3 from Safer's series. And then the following week will be a panel discussion about time travel in role-playing games. This episode, the second part, gets into the nitty-gritty of time travel theories and ideas. So it's not specifically about role-playing games, although there is some talk on how to use these ideas in role-playing games at the end, where Minion, also known as Rob from Confessions of Wheat Timorous Bushi, asks, what happens if they try to kill Bilbo? So stay tuned for that, and I hope you enjoy. If you do enjoy these and you want to call us, leave us comments, notes, you can leave a message going to the website of the podcast on Anchor. You'll find a way to leave a message there. You can send an email to cerebrivore@gmail.com. If you attach a voicemail, we can play it on a future show. Otherwise, we can read your email and respond to it. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, you can leave a message in the YouTube comments. We appreciate all feedback, and I hope to hear from you listeners soon. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Safer.
Time travel in role-playing games. An Idiot's Guide by Safer. Or is that a safer guide by... Wait. Hold on. Haven't I already said this? Are you sure? I have a terrible feeling of deja vu.
It's just a jump to the left. With your hands on your hips. No. Could you just stop that, please? Oh dear. I think that's my worst one yet, isn't it? I think I've cringed myself out with that, and I'm the one that recorded it. Honestly. I mean, the amount of work to try and get that 30 seconds of cringeworthy time warp music, trying to combine my awful Charles Gray impression with my awful modulated singing with a bit of YouTube karaoke music that I ripped off, trying to get them to sing together. I still couldn't do it in the end, but dearie me, so much effort just for 30 seconds of cringeworthy nonsense. I don't know why I bother, but anyway, welcome to the second part of my podcasts on time travel. This is part 2 of Concepts in Time. So in this one I'm going to be covering the multi-universe, or the multiverse, and the offshoot of that, or the version of that, the nodal universe, as a halfway concept between the multiverse and the fixed time continuum, Fixed time continuum. Anyway, while I was preparing this, I got 3 messages through from Spike Pit, from the Mighty Joe Richter, and from Rob, aka Minion, of the Confessions of a Wee Tim's Bushy podcast. I'm going to... I was, originally when I got them messages, I thought, oh, perhaps I could make a conceit here. Perhaps I could splice these messages in and act as if... make the podcast sound as if it's a presentation being given by some idiot professor. Perhaps that's like, I don't know, some institute within Barney Dicker's League of Eternal Guardians Eldritch time travel game. See, I was like some idiot professor presenting my findings to 3 dignitaries from different organisations within the League. And I'll do it like... After the first podcast on time travel, I thought like how perhaps there was some secret scrolls that discovered on a field mission, and the initial promise of the interpretation of the field scrolls had give way, and that they weren't such a great find, that the translation of the second set of scrolls had realised that the writer was a bit of an idiot, really. Me. But I couldn't work it out. I thought, no, that's just a contrivance. Too far on top of a cringe, too far on top of a fraud, too far, which is my entire podcast. So I'll not bother. What I'll do is I'll just do the bit that I had planned. Well, not really a plan, but... And then I'll have their messages at the end, and I'll deal with their comments then. Rob's comment, Minions, it's not exactly about time travel. It's about something parallel to time travel that he saw a relationship or a similarity to, and I can see his point. Actually, it is quite I can see the relevance of it. But I think his questions will actually be useful if I try and answer his questions in the style or using the 3 concepts as the guide to my answers. And perhaps I can use Rob's question as a way of presenting perhaps a methodology, a stepwise methodology of how a GM might want to use these concepts in a sequential way to get a satisfactory outcome in their game. So perhaps thinking first about the fixed time continuum, then thinking about a nodal solution to a problem, and then thinking perhaps relying on the multi-universe, which is kind of like the catch-all, get out of jail concept. So I think Rob's questions in particular will be very useful for actually hopefully trying to present some of this nonsense as possibly beneficial, perhaps some kind of method that might be able to be used within a game. But I don't know, we'll see how we go. So all I'm going to do in this podcast is I actually made some notes originally about these ideas, and I wrote them down for Jason Connolly of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast podcast, because I was talking about perhaps doing something with him about it, but it never happened. And I sent these notes over to him to give him an idea of what I was up to and what I was thinking of. So I haven't scripted this podcast, as you can tell. I'm just rambling away already. I'm just going to go through the notes that I sent to him, and perhaps just almost like dusting off the old findings myself. So it is going to be a bit like finding some ancient scrolls and seeing what's in there, because I can't quite remember. I can't remember exactly what I wrote about it, and I'm going to have to rethink about it as I go through it. So I'll just read them out and see if I can make some sense of it. Right, so I'm going to start with the multi-universe, because I think that's a more common idea that people are probably more familiar with than perhaps the nodal universe. Or perhaps more accurate to say the nodal universe being a halfway house is more like the convergent universe. It's a version of the multi-universe, but... So on my notes, I wrote, the multi-universe, another common idea that every event, option, choice, or possible outcome in any given moment is actually a separate dimension, and gives rise to an infinite number of other dimensions that occur and spread out from each subsequent event. I think that's a critical element, the spreading out part, the divergence of subsequent events. This creates a world of infinite possibility and makes paradox allowed and irrelevant, as every possible event exists in tandem to each other and as a separate universe. This can get quite complex in its theory and practice. that all things that could happen already have happened somewhere. A major consequence of this type of universe is the importance of consciousness and its role as a point of experience that can move between worlds. Time-travelling players in this universe become dimensional travellers. The possibilities are only limited by the GM's imagination. Back to the Future is a movie that utilises the multiverse variant of the parallel world. It also incorporates some ideas of the nodal concept, i.e. the events of 1955 are a pivotal point in the multiverse where other parallel worlds split out from. The multiverse does not have to contain an infinite number of worlds with the parallel worlds concept. Heinlein's Number of the Beast says there are 6 to the power of 6 to the power of 6 universes, which is a large number but not infinite. The treatment and concept of consciousness becomes key in these worlds, as is seen with the time lag effect in Back to the Future, as Marty and his previous dimensions are slowly erased from history. The multiverse parallel world can create apparent paradoxes of its own, as in the Star Trek episode City on the Edge of Forever, in which Dr. McCoy goes back in time through a portal on a planet and stops the United States of America from entering World War II. He changes history so that Starfleet never existed and the Enterprise disappears, and it is up to Kirk and Spock to fix the timeline. But if Starfleet never existed and the Enterprise disappears, then why didn't Kirk and Spock disappear too? Fortunately, the multiverse concept is flexible enough that a GM could just say that while on the planet with the time portal, the characters are outside the normal flow and action of time, which means that that planet and that portal area is another subdimension in itself. And that is a very common concept as well within ideas of a multi-universe, that they're often tied together or they're overseen by a separate place outside of time itself as a separate dimension in itself. And I suppose that dimension itself could have its own timeline and perhaps its own multiverse timeline within that one, and then the whole thing just spirals away out of control, as the multi-universe has a tendency to do. It's very easy just to fall down rabbit holes thinking about this sort of stuff. And I've wrote it really can get very complicated, and there is the risk that in an RPG the whole thing could become too convoluted to be believable or enjoyable. But that is the challenge to the players and the GM. Other ideas like the web concept, time slips, etc. are just a rabbit hole to fall into. A really good time travel session will likely mix up the ideas and concepts and keep the whole thing a bit mysterious. Trying to tie everything down will probably lead to disaster for the GM and kill the magic of time travel. But an understanding of the basic concepts above will allow the GM to experiment and give them a basis to improvise their time travel campaigns for maximum fun. Right, so that's what I wrote down in the notes about the multi-universe. And if I try to make sense of what I said, so the multi-universe is a concept of infinite worlds, or perhaps not infinite worlds, perhaps just parallel worlds in a finite number. Could include both infinite and finite concepts. Of divergent worlds that split off into their own existences from every single action, event, choice, decision, incident, reaction that could possibly occur within the universe. Now, I don't want to really go into realistic theories about multiverses that have been presented as a result of, say, like quantum theory and other things, because I don't really understand them. I only have a wafer-thin knowledge of the commonly held platitudes about it, and I don't think it's going to add that much to us as role players, really. More of the literary and storytelling traditions are probably going to be more valuable to it. I think there's some confusion in the scientific world about multi-universes between the concept of a multiverse in space and a multiverse within time. A lot of what physics talks about as a multiverse is talking about like universes colliding and different expansion rates within the universe, different parts of the universe, creating areas of the universe that are their own universe because they have different constants universal constants, Planck's constants and things, different mathematical formulas that rule they're part of the universe. That seems to me like a concept of different areas of space, really, all within one larger universe. And I don't really understand the concepts that people describe about multi-universes in real physics and cosmology. It's really, really tangled, and a lot of the terms are almost impenetrable to a layperson like me. So I think I'm just going to leave them alone. Also because they're argued over. There's no real consensus in the scientific community about some of these theories. Some of them are dismissed by some. It's string theory and all that. I don't really understand that. So there's this idea about different parts of the universe having different expansion rates, and space itself expanding. The idea of multiple universes possibly colliding into each other. That really leads into. There's a concept that haunted Carl Sagan, which was the concept of the infinite regression universe, which is a commonly held religious opinion. I think it comes from possibly Hindu mythology. I'm not sure. Where the idea that, say, like our universe is just a single atom within another universe, a much larger scale universe. That is it really haunted Carl Sagan because it was such an evocative. It was the only religious idea that really inspired him in any kind of way, because it was so tantalizing to him. Because it's this. Billy Connolly, the great philosopher Billy Connolly, said that there was an awful lot of hints in the universe. We just have to be able to open our eyes and accept them. So like the idea of for years people thought the world was flat, and yet all you had to do was look up into the night sky and see a really big hint there shining, the moon telling you that no, things are not flat, they're round. And then later on when people started to be able to view the sun through darkened glass or project an image onto a sheet of paper or something, they could see that was round. And then when the early telescopes got to see the planets, Jupiter and Mars and Venus, they were all round as well, and yet we were still flat, even though everything else around us was round. And it's evocative that our models of, say, atoms with neutron and proton cores surrounded by electrons in ever-increasing energy shells is a very close model to what our solar system looks like. And I don't know if our models of our atoms have been influenced by the shape of the solar system or what, but it is very tantalizing to perceive of our solar system as perhaps just a single atom within a much larger scale universe, and so that there's an endless number of universes which exist within the same space, just at different scales. This is actually alluded to in the Men in Black movie, when the universe in the marble on the cat's collar, an entire galaxy stored within a single marble, and then at the end it's revealed that our entire universe is itself, or our galaxy is itself, just stored within another glass marble in a much larger scaled universe that an alien is using to play a game of marbles with. Yeah, that is a tantalizing concept, but I don't think that ties into common concepts of the multi-universe, which is the idea of the multi-universe of time, which is basically different dimensions all existing in their own places, separate and distinct from each other, and yet somehow with time travel linked in a way that they can be traversed between each other. And I'm getting a bit confused in myself now. I'm going to get back to perhaps some useful concepts of the multi-universe. So everyone's familiar with multi-universe. The MCU in the Marvel Universe it's a very common idea. As I said, it appears in other movies like Back to the Future. I think one of the common things with the multi-universe is that people have typically in the past equated the multi-universe with some analogy in the real world. It's commonly, what people tend to do is they commonly make the analogy in their mind of a model that relates the concept of the multi-universe to some physical entity within our real world. So in the article in the White Dwarf issue, which is Journeys in Time by Stephen Palmer. He suggests that one of the common analogies or models that people make for time is the concept of something related to water, the idea of sort of like a river or a stream flowing forward towards perhaps a sea or a lake. And that, I think that thinking about a multi-universe, if you want to put it in your games, it's a good idea to think of perhaps a physical object that you can relate as an analogy in your mind to allow you to think of how you want things to play out in your game. So if you have the concept of, say, like your time concept as like a river flowing with different tributaries all leading into rivers leading off into the sea, you can use that as a structure to then make judgments about how time works within your game. So, as an example, Michael Moorcock actually uses the concept of sort of like the flowing water, the river of time, in his Dances at the End of Time trilogies. I don't know if he uses the same concept in his other Eternal Champion stories, but in those stories, there's the concept he uses of time travelling forward naturally, and eventually all travellers in time and denizens and travellers in space actually all end up at this decadent, decrepit, senile old Earth right at the end of time, which is inhabited by really hedonistic, debauched descendants of humanity who have almost godlike powers that they don't really understand, that they've inherited from what is to them ancient technologies and ancient cities that exist on the planet. And they live this sort of hedonistic lifestyle, almost like sort of Oscar Wilde type sentiment and behaviour and attitudes. That sort of decadent cafe, late Victorian society type of universe. And in that model of time travel, all travellers in time tend to end up flushed down the drain, as it were, and end up at this decrepit old Earth. Because this concept of a river flowing forward means that time travel, forward-moving time travel, is easy in Michael Moorcock's concept. But time travel into the past is exceptionally difficult, because time travel has come up against something that he describes as the Morpheus effect, which is named after the imaginary scientist who discovered it. And it's almost like the tide of time, the forward pressure, like a river moving, pushes people naturally forward. So forward time travel is easy, but reverse travel into the past is very difficult. And the Morpheus effect can have quite drastic effects on people in that model. It can either just... So a time traveller that can travel finds it easy to travel forward in time using his device. When he tries to travel into the past, suddenly might find themselves suddenly just stopped and not able to go into the past at all. Or perhaps trying to move into the past creates like a friction effect against this forward Morpheus force effect that can overheat the time travel device and cause perhaps an explosion and kill the time traveller. Or perhaps it can create like a chaotic whiplash effect where the attempt to move into the past can just cause them to flick off somewhere totally random and unexpected, like say they're like land in the Jurassic Age or something, and without their time travel device, and they just end up stranded. It's a useful concept that Moorcock comes up with to really to avoid or limit the risk of paradox in his stories, because it means that you can't go into the past and you can't create paradox because it's very difficult. He does give the idea that there is an innate resistance to this Morpheus effect that living organisms have, and different organisms have different levels of resistance to it. Creatures that have a natural resistance to this Morpheus effect naturally make good time travellers and become part of the time travel. I can't remember the time travel league or something. Like, is it Mrs. Una Pearson? I'm not reviewing the books. I'm not checking. I think that is. She's one of the famous time travellers. But I think he describes like the Eternal Champions themselves. They all have this natural resistance against the Morpheus effect, so they are better able to travel into the past and around time and cause more trouble. But you can see how using the concept of time being like water flowing forward in a river with a force to it and tides, that allows him to then perceive of things like the Morpheus effect and to come up with ideas of how time works. So having that model of a physical analogous thing to link to allows them to then sort of just naturally and intuitively come up with ideas. And I think a GM could use that on the spot in a game if he has that sort of, or if they have that model idea in their head. And another idea that's commonly held for the multi-universe is the sort of like tree-like branching, or like a vascular system constantly branching away. You see that in like Loki, the Marvel Universe's Loki TV show. It was you could see in the depictions of the timeline as it spread out across the galaxy, almost like a root system just constantly diverging away. That would naturally, again, if you thought of time like that, you would think, well, does that mean that time travel, if it's a branching system, does that mean I have to go back in the past to a nodal point? Do I have to go back to another branching point to then go forward again? So in a model like that, rather than simply just travelling to another time and place in the future, or parallel to yourself in the present, would you perhaps need to go back into the past and then down another branch? And so, not necessarily, but having those models, those physical analogous models in your head, might allow you to conceive of things as you go in the game, and again give you some of that quick-fire agility. Now, I'm rambling badly here because I've not scripted any of this. This is all just off the top of my head, and I'm probably going to have to edit this down big style later. So yeah, if to try to find some useful recommendation, if you want to consider using the multi-universe concept of infinite or large numbers of divergent worlds leading off from individual events and possibilities and choices, perhaps if you can think of some physical analogy in the real world that you might want to relate that concept to, it'll allow you to then think consistently and a bit more coherently about how you may want events to play out in your multiverse. And I'll just leave that open to you to come up with concepts or models and analogies that you might want to link back to the concept. But it is the multi-universe, yeah, it is the catch-all concept. It's probably where most GMs are going to end up relying on in the end, given that the players are likely to cause as much trouble as they do within the game and the timeline. But I think just, yeah, if you can just perhaps think of some models in your head, like the ideas of the water or the tree branching or the other, perhaps the web, a spider's web type idea, and then just think how that physical analogy might tie into what it means for the concept of time. And also remember that idea of the neutral space of the place in between worlds that seems to act as a hub for the multi-universe. That's a common concept that's often used. I mean, there's lots of other used concepts of I mean, like Matthew McConaughey in Interstellar, there's a sort of multi-dimension, multi-universe concept there, where it's almost like he's floating around, and again in another neutral sub-universe, sub-dimension, looking into other dimensions, almost in like a sort of 3D array arrangement of little boxes that he can move between. And or perhaps you could think of the universe as like a stack of sheets of paper, or like a book piled up, so you can perhaps move from one page to the next, but to get from the end of the multi-universe to the start of the multi-universe takes more time. And yeah, just let your mind roll. You could, but be careful. Don't fall down the rabbit hole with this, because it is a very good chance of it. Right, I'm going to leave this alone because I can feel the rabbit hole of the Event Horizon pulling at my brain with this one. So I'm going to leave this and I'm going to go on to the Nodal Universe. Perhaps at the end, as a discussion of models of time concepts, I might discuss Sapphire and Steel's model of time at the end of this podcast. I'll see how the time goes, because it's quite a complex model, but it's interesting in its implications. But right, so I'll get back to the Nodal Universe and so I'm just going to go back to my notes, and the notes that I wrote on the Nodal Universe, which I now think is probably best described as the convergent universe. It's the multi-universe that doesn't just diverge away from each other; it actually has the chance of converging back together. So I said the Nodal Universe, or the All Roads Lead to Rome universe. Most common concept used in most RPG games and modules. You have fixed events or story beats that must occur, but how they occur, when they occur, and how the players interact with them are all variable. Best reference for this is the Terminator 3 movie. Major events will happen. Skynet will be created. It will be destroyed. but how and when and by whom is all up for grabs. Every dungeon with an end boss fight is a nodal universe stroke game. It's easily understood and most natural to use in a role-playing game. Just set up your node points and then just let your players go. This model can still be broken as it's not as flexible as the pure multiverse, but players really need to try hard to break it and they would reveal themselves as real douchebags in the process. Most GMs will think of ways to create the node events without too much contrivance, but some sandbox-loving players may take issue with this concept. So that's what I wrote, and I think when I get to Menion's comments at the end, I'll be able to go into that nodal universe as an example of how the convergent universe could be applied later on. The idea of the Terminator 3 universe, one of the things of, like the Terminator 3 universe where the events that Skynet is created by other people, it's not the original scientist who was originally going to create Skynet. It was by people who came after him, and it was delayed. The creation of Skynet was simply delayed by the actions that occurred in Terminator 2. In reality, that is a multi-universe. It is a totally different universe. It's a different set of events. It's a different set of people and activities. It's a different Skynet. It's not the same Skynet. So the concept of the convergence in Terminator 3 is really it's a human value judgment. It's how we view the events. The fact that we seem to see the events of Terminator 1 and Terminator 2 as parallel and simply the same events but delayed in Terminator 3 is simply our judgment of it. It's not in any real sense actually the same thing. It is a genuine multi-universe. So something about the nodal universe and the convergent universe might just be down to the perception of the viewer, which is a nice little possible tie into some quantum ideas. Quantum theory has a nice idea of, is it eugenesis? Oh, I can't remember. What's the name of it? I'm going to have to look that up in Google. Hold on. It's eigenstates, isn't it? From the uncertainty principle. Electrons can't be pinned down until once they're observed, then they're pinned down into an eigenstate, and so therefore it can be conceived that an electron can inhabit numerous potential eigenstates, and then it's only the act of observation that when the wave function collapses that it actually forms into a real physical form. It takes a real physical state, but it has these potential to form these different states, and so that's an interesting concept as well from quantum physics, the idea that reality isn't actually created until the wave function collapses, which again I don't really understand. Some of these concepts are just beyond me, but something about the nodal universe. I mean, it's equated to the way most role-playing games are played. Every dungeon with a start point and a big boss fight at the end. Yeah, they're just two nodal points. They're just 2 points where how you exactly get there, the path that you take to get there, a dungeon with 20 rooms, how you go through them, how you interact with them, whether you miss bits, leave things out, don't acquire the essential parts to deal with the boss in the end. That's all how the game plays out, and that's the individual story of the game. But that actual end fight, that's the end of the game. So that's how most games are really played. Really, let's be honest with ourselves. Most games are set up on a scaffolding, on a structure. They often have individual beats to hit, but how those beats are reached and who does it and what happens in between is all up to the players themselves. Players don't have complete agency just to dictate the game world, really, in most games. So yeah, you can shout at me OSR as much as you like. I don't really understand any of that either, but yeah, it's an easy concept to get, I think, the idea of a convergent universe of events. That model of the sort of branching tree that I gave for the multi-universe, where you have to go back in the past to go down a different future. You could possibly describe that as a nodal universe, but that's not really what I'm conceiving of. I'm conceiving this idea of events sort of spreading apart and diverging, but then coming back and converging back together at some point in the future. This is what Stephen Palmer describes in his article as the organic universe, and it's an element of both of the fixed time continuum. idea that in the fixed time continuum there is a true timeline, a sort of a base level timeline, almost like sort of like the way gravity affects on a pendulum or on water. So the way that water finds its own level, or a pendulum will naturally, after being agitated, will slowly stop swinging and hang straight vertically down, or the way perhaps like an oscillating string will eventually settle out and lie at rest. It's this idea that there's a natural low energy state to the universe that the universe tends to congregate at and go back down to, and if left to its own devices will settle into that naturally. So I think that's sort of like an analogous model that I've created in my head, that idea of sort of like water finding its own level, a sort of universe that has a natural low energy state that it naturally falls into. So that would be the case with the Terminator. The natural state of the universe was the creation of Skynet, and you can agitate as much as you like. You can change the events, you can delay it, you can slow it down, but you can't stop it. The world is naturally going to gravitate at some point down to that. But also, of course, it doesn't necessarily have to be a natural low energy state that the universe wants to settle into. The Loki TV show actually has a sort of pure timeline that is artificially maintained. It's not just a natural settling that the universe comes down to. There is an actual will. There are, was it the Time Variance Authority, was it? Is that what it was called? I can't remember now. Again, I'm just going to leave that guerrilla podcast style thing there. They were actively pruning and cutting off divergent timelines to maintain a sort of steady state base timeline. So it wasn't just a natural occurrence that the universe had, a natural tendency the universe had. It was an artificial thing that was being applied to the multi-universe by well, I don't know, say benevolent or malevolent force, but by an actual, an artificial will, by an intentionally external force that was causing the convergence. And that, I mean, that could be like, it's like a god, isn't it? It's like, it's the concept of a god. Fate. So, yeah, that could be something you might want to use within a concept of a nodal convergent universe. There are other powers at work directing the course of history, and that comes into also the sort of anthropomorphic element of time, the sort of animism, anthropomorphic way that time has sometimes been depicted as a thing, as a person, as an entity, as a will. Yeah, I think if you're offended by that, yeah, then perhaps you're probably going to head into the multi-universe. But I think it is an easy concept that allows GM to give their games, their time travel games, room to breathe and spread and form their own sort of narratives, but at least to maintain some structure, some baseline to the game that they can come back to if needed, if they have to bring the game back to an even keel. I think it's the most natural way of playing the game. I hope I've expressed myself clearly enough there. Perhaps when I answer Menion's questions, it'll be a bit more obvious with his particular example. Now, I don't think there's anything... I don't have any more notes. I just have some reference points about the movies that I quoted. Not on that section. I have some other notes on actual time travel itself, and that'll have to be in the first part of the second part of the podcast. So my next podcast will have to be on actual time travel devices and methods themselves, and I suppose I'll have to actually start making sense and putting some meat on the bones there and providing something of actual value that games masters and players might be able to use in their games. So I'll leave it there. I've rambled longer than I've wanted again. I'll just go now to the messages that I received from these lovely people. Thank you for that. It was really nice to hear from them and encouraging. And okay, we'll start with perhaps we'll start with the mighty Joe Richter and his observations about what I said in the first podcast.
Hey, Safer, dude, that was the greatest intro to a podcast I've ever heard in my whole life, man. That was awesome, dude. And yeah, this is a fascinating subject. I love that you made an episode about time and time travel over the span of about a year, recorded at different times during the time stream. Very cool, man. I did want to say, I'm no physicist expert or anything, but as far as time dilation goes, and empirical science, that one has been pretty much proven to be accurate through a bunch of different experiments over the course of the past 100 years. It's used in GPS with satellites and GPS and everything. So yeah, it's weird, it's spooky stuff, but that at least has been empirically shown to be accurate. Anyway, man, great stuff. Peace out. Hey, Safer, it's me again. I just gotta say, I just finished your episode, and that was such a good episode, man. That was fascinating to listen to. I cannot wait for the episode on nodal universes and possibly another episode on the multiverse and all of it, man. Yeah, just really, really good stuff. Anyway, I just wanted to say that. Peace out.
Hello, Joe. Thank you for the messages. Really appreciate the encouragement. But yeah, when it comes to real physics, I admit I'm an idiot. I haven't got a clue what I'm talking about. I've only got a dilettante's wafer-thin level of understanding of these things, and that's an insult to dilettantes and wafers, frankly. But yeah, I didn't even realise that GPS systems relied on or were based on a time dilation theory. I didn't have a clue. So I had a quick look on Google. I had a quick look at the Wikipedia. That's the veneer level of research that I involve myself in these days, and I had a look, didn't really understand it. Saw some things about how the satellites in space going faster than the satellites on Earth should be moving more slowly in time than the ones on Earth, but how, because of the proximity of Earth being closer to the gravitational effect of the Earth, the clocks in space are actually going faster than the ones in time. They're moving faster through time than the ones on the Earth. So there's general relativity and special relativity working against each other or something. But I don't know. I was looking at it and I was thinking, okay, it's based on cesium and the oscillations of cesium, the way that cesium absorbs energy and emits energy at a particular wavelengths. And I thought, I wonder if there's a redshift effect, a gravitational redshift effect is possibly taking place here. But I also just wondered if these atomic clocks in the satellites are sending radio signals to Earth, do we even need time dilation for that? As long as the satellites are sort of in sync with each other, sending the same signal, isn't it just the time differentiation of one signal reaching you from the other, where you can just cross-reference your position from that? Is it just a bit like a missile tracking system? Do you even need time dilation to explain this? I don't know, but yeah, I admit I'm stupid. I haven't got a clue what I'm talking about. I'll have to defer to more intelligent and more diligent people. I am aware that as I'm getting older, my faculty for rational thought is getting less. The dilemma between my rational brain and my superstitious faith-based brain is increasing as I get older, and I realise I haven't got the faculty, the time, or the energy to really look into things and understand things logically. I'm falling back on knee-jerk superstitious reactions, and yeah, I'm aware I'm getting stupider as I get older. But thanks, Joe. It's always interesting hearing from you. Take care. Bye-bye.
More safer fantasy crafting. More safer fantasy crafting. More safer fantasy crafting. Yay! Oh, mate, can you come up with a more catchy title? Oh, I love that episode, man. I love your time travel, and I thought that was an awesome introduction. Nobody does it like safer fantasy crafting. Big respect. Laters.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Thank you for that enthusiastic encouragement there. Thanks for the chant as well. More safer fantasy crafting. Thank you. Yeah, it doesn't fit that well into a song, does it? But, safer fantasy crafting, it's all an accident, Colin. It's all an accident. I contacted Colin. I messaged him with this and said it was all an accident. And he said he replied to me saying I was just joking about the name, but really it is a bit of a mouthful. And I thought perhaps Safer Fantasy Crafting would be a bit snappier if you abbreviated it down to SFC. But then I thought, oh, that sounds a bit like KFC. Might just make people think of bargain buckets and chicken wings. I was originally meant to be setting this thing up as a crafting channel. It was meant to be a miniature crafting channel on YouTube. I got back into role-playing in about, 2018, was it? I think. My nephew showed me these videos by DM Scotty, the crafting videos, about this. He made how he makes stuff for Dungeons and Dragons, and I had no idea. I had no idea that Dungeons and Dragons even still existed and that these things were happening. And I loved them. I got back into them and I thought, yeah, I can do this. And so I set up the email and I set up a YouTube channel to perhaps do some videos together, because I was watching all these videos and I love the creativity of the things that they make. But I was wincing at some of the safety things they were doing, like leaving blades with their knives with their blades extended out on the table right next to their arm where they're working and things. I was thinking, and I saw a lot of them using hot glue guns. And so, like, instead of like, say, they're trying to glue a skull onto a little miniature pillar of a little foam pillar, and instead of gluing the destination and pushing the little skull onto it, they were holding the skull between their forefinger and thumb, and then trying to put the glue on the skull. So bringing the red hot nozzle of the glue gun right up next to their fingers, and I'm going, and loads of other things I saw that I thought. Well, actually, I thought a lot of these craftings, I was trying to think, which ones could I have done as a kid? Which equipment and tools would I have had access to? And I started to think, started to judge some of the videos like, this would be a 15+ one. I could have done this when I was 15. And perhaps I could have done this one when I was 12. But I thought there was almost no videos that I could have done for, like, when I was under 12. I wouldn't have had access to the equipment or tools. So I thought perhaps I could make some videos for under 12s that are more safer type of videos. Perhaps have videos that I could rate as like under 12, 12+, 15+ as like safe, safer, safe-ish type videos. So that was my idea, and then I just accidentally fell into podcasting after talking to Menion on Twitter. So it was all a bizarre accident. But cheers, Colin. Thanks for encouraging. I'm really enjoying, Colin, your latest podcast. You seem to have fit into a groove with this journalistic diary type podcast where you just relay some of the things that has been happening to you and some of the thoughts you've been having and ideas, and I'm really enjoying it, and I think you're really hitting a groove with those podcasts. I would like to still hear some more Strahd from you, mate. I really enjoyed that atmosphere, that interaction between your family. It felt like a really natural, genuine way of role-playing. So I don't know if you've got any more of them planned, but I'm really enjoying what you're putting out at the minute. But thanks for the message, Colin. Okay, so next we've got Menion from the Wheat and Rizbushi podcast, and he's asking about, it's not time travel questions that he has, but he's seen this relevance and parallel idea with games that have canon in them, an established timeline. So not necessarily games that involve with time travel, just games that have established timelines. And I can see that parallel. I can see where he's coming from with this. I'll try and answer him not using my personal prejudices or opinions. I'll try and answer his question from the point of view of the individual concepts that I've already presented. So hopefully I'll present a more objective viewpoint and perhaps show a way that the concepts could be used by a GM, even sequentially as a methodology, as a way of coming up with ideas at the table when faced with them. But okay, Rob, so take it away.
I'll say for this is Menion, also known as Rob, or the other way around, of Confessions of Wheat and Rizbushi. Just listening to your first part of time travel, time this and that theories for role-playing games that you're doing. Very good stuff. Usually I don't get involved with science fiction role-playing games, but it does occur to me that this does have an impact on games with a fixed kind of a chronology or canon, such as we see in Glorantha or Middle Earth or whatnot. I'm about to start a Glorantha campaign that is 7 years before the new kind of RuneQuest Glorantha set date. So it'll be interesting to see what events the characters get involved in that might sort of change the new canon. With Glorantha, of course, they say that your Glorantha will vary, not may vary, will vary. So the assumption there is that things, each table will change the material, change the world, change ideas to suit their needs, and there will not be one single canon, official canon beyond. There will be official canon, but it's not really canon as such. It's just a framework with which to run with and change as you see fit, to modify. And similarly, you've got the new Middle-earth role-playing game, The One Ring. The first thing one of the players said was, right, I want to kill Bilbo, or something like that, right? So they automatically want to break the game. They want to break things, and that's what players often wish to do. I don't know, what do you think about that? Anyway, cheers.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Yeah. Kill, space, Bilbo, return. Syntax error. I do not understand. Please try again. Yeah, the classic dilemma for a GM, the classic problem that every GM faces when playing role-playing games. I think that might be why I was never attracted to games with canon, frankly. I never played MERP or Star Trek or Star Wars or any of those games. I played RuneQuest 3, so I kind of missed out on Glorantha. The Glorantha scenarios in RuneQuest 3 were just an echo of the RuneQuest 2 canon and mythos. It didn't really carry it. It was just an option of flavour thing. And I never involved in it. I just played in my own homebrew games with RuneQuest 3. So I've always avoided the question of canon, and that might be the reason why. Certainly with MERP, I didn't want to spoil Middle-earth by playing it. I felt that if we started mucking around in Middle-earth, we would just spoil the whole thing that was quite significant and poignant to me, Middle-earth, and I didn't want to mess about with it. And like Dungeons and Dragons at its best felt like a kitchen sink pastiche of like mythological stories, like Knights of the Round Table and things, and Sinbad. But I didn't really worry about that so much. I was aware that I was just messing around with these ideas. But there was a part of me that did think that sometimes D&D often became less of a pastiche, more of a parody and a bit of a joke at times. And there was this idea, I did have a nagging feeling that D&D was a bit naff really at times. And I think that's why I moved to RuneQuest for a bit more of a grittier experience. But as I say, I missed out on the canon. So, yeah. I said I was going to answer this objectively, but from my own personal point of view, I think if I was 12 when I first started role-playing, somebody did that to me, kill Bilbo, I think I would have went, "Oh, you bumbag," and then stormed out and said, "I don't want to be GM anymore," and would have just went off and played something less boring like football instead. I think by the time I was 15, I probably would have went, either depending on what mood I was in, I would have went, okay, go for it, or perhaps just said, okay, roll the dice, do it, and continued with it through gritted teeth sort of thing, resented the direction of the campaign that was going to be taken after that. But I was used to that sort of thing by then. But I think now, if we look at it in terms of, for me, these concepts are really just what is going to be give a most satisfying experience for you and your group at the table. That's all I'm interested in. I'm not interested in dogma or strict methodologies that you have to adhere to. It's just what's going to seem best. So actually, if we take that concept of kill Bilbo. So if we think, first of all, like along the lines of the strict fixed time continuum, let's try and stick to canon. Is there any way we can do it reasonably and justifiably? I think that's the thing. As long as we're doing some things that seem reasonable and fitting and not like we're cheating the players or the system, and it produces a satisfactory and enjoyable outcome, then who cares? So I would say, first of all, kill Bilbo. First thing is, has he got the ring? Is this after he acquired the One Ring? And I think, well, if he has, then yeah, that would be a good reason to take the sort of fixed time continuum canon route. I think if he's got the ring, then he's the greatest escapologist the world has ever seen. He's better than Harry Houdini. You know, I mean, he escaped from the goblins underneath the Misty Mountains. He escaped from Gollum. He jumped over the top of Gollum. He escaped through a door that the orcs were actually standing in front of. He escaped from the Elven King's halls. He even escaped from Smaug in Erebor with the help of the ring. So if he's got the ring, I wouldn't have any qualms about saying something like, okay, you draw your sword, but as you draw your sword, you see Bilbo suddenly jam his hand into his pocket and poof, he disappears right in front of you. As you swing your sword wildly through midair and try to steady yourself and not unbalance yourself, you hear the slam of a door at the rear towards the kitchen in Bilbo's house. What are you going to do? I think I wouldn't have any problem with saying something like that. And then, oh well, I'm gonna loot his house. Okay, so you find a load of pipe weed and some books on genealogy and things, and you can hear some shouting going on down the street. What do you want to do? I'll have a look out the window. Oh, you can see a group of hobbits seem to be gathering at the bottom of the street. Some have got pitchforks, some have got large dogs with them, and some are carrying torches. They seem to be shouting and arguing and pointing up towards the house. What are you going to do? So, okay, yeah, you know what I mean. So, regardless, you're in a negative world now. You're going to have to fight your way out of Hobbiton. But even if he hasn't got the ring, Bilbo, any system that doesn't give Bilbo massive advantages for having the ring, for being able to escape from situations, is probably not doing its job. But even without the ring, Bilbo was pretty good at escaping from things. I think he wriggled out of that sack with the trolls, and he even escaped the goblins under the Misty Mountains just by getting knocked out. He didn't even do anything. He just got knocked out, got picked up by a dwarf, dropped, and rolled away, and he didn't get caught that way. And, I mean, he jumped over the top of Gollum's head, and he squeezed past a load of orcs that were guarding a door and pushed himself through the door. So he's got natural abilities as just a halfling for escaping. So I think if he didn't have the ring, you're less likely to be able to apply a canon-based fixed time continuum justification to continue with the canon. You'd have to say, okay, roll the dice then, let's see what happens. But I would expect, as I say, I would expect the system to provide Bilbo some big advantages on being able to escape from situations. But then, let's say that fails. Let's say our attempts to maintain canon fails in an justifiable way. You don't want to just suddenly say, oh, Gandalf appears at the door and casts blinding light and everyone disappears. Yeah, that would be an obvious cheat. So, yeah, if we can't provide a reasonable, justifiable reason to maintain the canon, then perhaps we need to go to the convergent canon or timeline concept. So we could ask ourselves, okay, so you fight Bilbo, you kill him, great, okay, we're on an evil campaign direction now. Let's consider this. What would be the actions now? Well, yes, probably you would possibly have to fight your way through and out of Hobbiton. You may have a mob or a militia after you. The group may well come to the attention of the Rangers of the North, possibly to the Elves of the Blue Mountains, perhaps even the Dwarfs of the Blue Mountains if they were already planning on hiring Bilbo. Perhaps ultimately the White Council and Gandalf would come to your attention. So you're on the run now. That's the direction of the game. So yeah, do what you like. You'd probably have to try and head to Angmar or something and try and get the help of the Witch King. But even if you manage to get the ring, kill Bilbo with the ring and steal the ring off him, probably, let's see how that would play out. You'd probably perhaps you would be thanked and made lieutenants in Sauron or the Witch King's armies, or perhaps they would just kill you for daring to touch his precious. Who knows? But yeah, so we could just play out that direction. But if you think about it for the timeline, what would happen even if they did kill Bilbo? Would Gandalf just pack up and go home, go, oh, that's it, I've had enough, I'm going back to Valinor? No, you'd probably just hire another. Let's think about the convergent universe. Let's think about the nodal universe. How would the timeline perhaps resettle itself? So probably Gandalf would probably just hire another hobbit to go on the expedition to Erebor. And it would be that hobbit who would capture the ring. You know, if you kill Bilbo when he didn't have the ring, perhaps it would be another hobbit who would find the ring, and then this mountain, it would be another hobbit who would come back from Erebor rich, and perhaps even that hobbit would perhaps be a relative of Frodo themselves in some way. Perhaps Gandalf would pick someone else related in or linked to Frodo in some way. So perhaps the ring would still come down to Frodo a generation later, after diverging away for a whole generation to a different hobbit and a different set of adventures. And then the timelines would re-establish themselves with Frodo still inheriting the ring later on. So, I mean, that would be the sort of nodal universe concept. And there's always points where the nodal, the world could reconfigure. So even if it didn't come down to Frodo, it could come down to someone else, you know. It could come down to, I don't know, Betty Bracegirdle or someone like that. Perhaps it was Betty Bracegirdle instead of Bilbo who went to the Erebor. And then perhaps it was her daughter, Buttercup Bracegirdle, who headed off to Mordor. So perhaps that would be the next convergent point, that it would be Buttercup Bracegirdle that dropped the ring into the crack of Mount Doom, and Sauron died, and the timeline continues from there. So, yeah, there's ways of using the convergent nodal idea of the universe to re-establish timelines and canon. But then you think to yourself, is that satisfactory? Is that going to be enjoyable at my table? You know, the players are still going to be continuing on their evil campaign. They're still going to have their evil agenda to do, but you could still maintain the canon by using this convergent idea. And even if you didn't, even if you then went, you thought that's not satisfactory, that still feels like a cheat. You could still then go to the multi-universe concept, go to the divergent universe and say, okay, so you kill Bilbo, you steal the ring, you take it back to Sauron or the Witch King, you get made a lieutenant in his army, and Sauron wins and takes over the world, and now we're continuing in this game. And that's the way it goes. We are in a totally different multi-universe. So you could use those three concepts to, you know, the fixed time continuum, the nodal universe, convergent universe, and the divergent multi-universe to establish how you want to run your game and continue with your game. But you do have to then judge, well, which one is actually going to be the most satisfactory? Which is the one that me and the table, me as the GM and the table and the players are going to enjoy the most? Is it going to be maintaining the canon and the timeline with Bilbo surviving? Is it going to be letting things deviate but having them come back together later on using the nodal convergent system? Or is it just let it roll whichever way it goes? Are you happy just playing a purely evil campaign? And I think there is the risk that when you get into the pure multi-universe divergent game, that games can become just too ridiculous to continue with. They can become parodies of themselves. I think that's why often a lot of time travel games lend themselves to the concept of humour. They naturally can become quite jokey and parodies of themselves. And there is always that risk that if you're trying to run a serious game, you may not want to go to a multi-universe. You may not want to allow time travel. It's why serious writers and authors have limited time travel in their games. They're aware of the dangers that time travel offers, this tendency to ridicule and ludicrousy. So there you go. What would I probably want to do? I think I would probably start with wanting to maintain canon and find a way to keep Bilbo alive myself. But I wouldn't be afraid of using one of the other techniques to perhaps reconnect the timeline later on, or even, as I say, depending on what mood I'm in, just let the whole game roll as they want and let it become a parody joke game, which is, I think playing something like, that's just my worry about playing something like MERP, that we'd all end up just playing Board of the Rings or the Boggart, not the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. We're playing the Boggart and the Board of the Rings, and I didn't want to do that in my games, but I suppose that's up to you and your table and how you want to play. But those are just three ideas and concepts that you can keep in mind and perhaps use as the basis for how you want to judge things. So I hope that's given an example of how these concepts can be used. I hope I've given an objective response there to you, Rob. I've said my preference would be probably to try and maintain the timeline in any way I could first, at least in a reasonable way, in a way that's justifiable. But I wouldn't be afraid to divert away to the other techniques as a not as a last resort, but as another option. I think I would always start with the fixed timeline continuum canon method and then work my way through from the fixed to the nodal convergent to the totally divergent multi-universe. I think that's the methodology I would always take as a personal level. So I hope I hope you're happy with that. I hope you're not screaming and shouting at me, Rob. I'm aware that I'm at odds with a lot of ideas in the OSR and things that people say in the OSR, but thanks for your question, Rob. I hope other people listening have thought that my answer was reasonable and did a good job of explaining the concepts that I've already presented. I realise I'm up to nearly 15 minutes on this answer, so I think I better cut things short. I think this whole podcast is now going to be next to the hour long. I don't think we'll have time to talk about Sapphire and Steel and that. I think I may have to leave that to a third tie-up podcast after I've dealt with time travel methods. I have to come to that next in the second part, and that's going to be a hefty section as well. There's going to be a lot to consider there, and I might have to script that one, I think, so that might take me a bit longer to get out. But thank you everyone for listening. I hope you found this first part worthwhile. Hopefully perhaps might speak to you in the second part on time travel itself. Take care. My God, it's full of stars.
A Nerds and Co broadcast, Cerebral podcast. Let's savor all the flavors from the spinal tap straw. All stars and pods past, Cerebral podcast. You're counting down your last as you admire them all. Something's growing teeth, or soon escaping your brain. What I mean is this is shades of fake. And from what I understand, that's don't look now, the Super Bowl is coming, and all that's left is the crying and the running. You can bring it, you can hide, I'll be above in any order. Just another brain of legal tossers running for the border. Just a snack, like a one, can I stutter? Beer and beer, always splitted buds. You can eat on a bacon, and his dust is never faded. It's savoring the flavor of the movies it created.